Hello everyone, let's do year 2007 main paper. Now there are many questions in this paper that are out of the syllabus, but it's okay, it's good to know. For example, the first question, we are looking at germination. And basically, there's this portion that you're looking at, which is the plumule or radicle. Now, R has the word root, R. Okay, so the radical actually refers to the root, which is the yellow portion in this video. And then the shoot, another name for it is actually called the plumule. Just let me spell it out for you. Okay, and this is where all your storage food is, and then this will eventually grow into the plant. The bean actually only starts to make its own food when they have its first leaves. Okay, so question on germination. These are some. We need water, oxygen, and warmth. Now, we know that seeds are a storage kind of food, right? So storage food. So mainly starch, fats, protein. So question asks, how are enzymes involved in the germination of seeds? So we need an enzyme to break down starch. So we've learned this before in the chapter on nutrients. So amylase is needed to break down starch to maltose, and whatever energy can be released from eventually maltose and glucose. Okay, so warmth speed up the whole process. Okay, question 1D, part 1. Question asks to state two methods by which fruits and seeds are dispersed. Okay, this is modes of dispersal or ways of dispersal. You can either talk about wind, water, animals. Now, please do not confuse this with pollination. Well, there are two modes of pollination of a flower, which we talk about insect or wind pollinated. That's another story. Okay, part 2. What are some of the advantages of this kind of dispersal? Now, collectively, we want the offsprings to be at a distance so that it doesn't compete with the parent plant for nutrients, water, sunlight. And it's usually to a less densely populated area. This ensures the survival. Therefore, higher survival is what we're looking at. Alright, question 2. Question 2, you're given an energy flow diagram where the bottom states the energy entering the food chain all the way upwards. At the side, you're given producer, it's consumed by X, consumed by a carnivore. Okay, A part 1. A part 1 asks, what's the source of energy? Obviously, the source is the sun. Okay, what would X represent? In this case, that would be a herbivore because it's consuming the producer. Suggest a food chain. Any food chain will do, so long as a logical food chain with 3 trophic levels. That's 1, 2, 3. Okay, B part 1 actually asks how much energy is lost. Now we need some values from the previous page. So let's go back to the previous slide. And we can see from the producer, which has about 8,000 kilojoules, to the next trophic level, only 780 remains. So we just use the value given here, which is 8,000 8,000 minus 780. Do your simple math, and you get the answer. Units given for you already. That's good. Okay, so question asks, explain how energy is lost. Now I need you to give specific examples of why energy is lost. Okay, so energy is definitely lost to the environment as heat is generated. So you can talk about heat generated during chemical reactions. You can talk about during respiration, energy used for growth and repair. You can talk about energy being trapped in the forms of body parts that cannot be eaten, either from the producers or the primary consumers. For example, in this case, cellulose cannot be digested if you don't have cellulase. Okay, so things along this line. Okay, part C looks like a very different question, but I need you to think about how is this related to what we've learned in biology. We are looking at the big idea of energy efficiency. Okay. So in terms of energy efficiency, shortage of food, we know that there's a world shortage of rice, grains, and whatsoever. Okay, it would help this problem if men ate the producers rather than organism X. So yes, actually the main focus is here, correct? So let's look at how we can phrase our answer. So the first thing we can talk about is about how energy is lost. 10% of energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next. 90% is lost. You can then talk a little bit about why energy is lost, depending on the number of marks given in this question. But the main idea is to focus on how to have an energy efficient chain. So the statement here is the longer the food chain, less energy transferred up to the top consumer. Okay, so they give an example here. By consuming the producer straight away, you will gain the highest amount because there's only one trophic level transfer. Okay, and therefore less energy lost, and you require smaller amounts of food. Okay, so in terms of energy efficiency, if you want to have this phrase in your answer, by all means, go ahead. Okay, that's for C. Okay, question 3. Question 3 is a definition question. You must score for this kind of question. So what exactly is a gene? We're looking at a segment of a DNA. You can talk about the 3 bases coding that codes for one amino acid that will eventually form the protein. So let me just write it down. You can talk about one codon. Okay, it will code for one amino acid that will eventually form the polypeptide and eventually form the protein. Okay, and that's the sequence of bases, correct? So I'll just write here 3 bases. Okay. Okay, term recessive. Recessive, we're looking at, it only expresses itself in the homozygous recessive condition. Big R, big R, big R, small r, small r. Now, if we let big R be dominant to small r, then the moment you have one big R, the phenotype will be expressed. So look at the keywords. I will look at phenotype. Homozygous need both in order for the phenotype to be expressed. Okay, so that's the definition for gene and term recessive. Okay, let's do question 3. Question 3, you're given a genetic pedigree diagram of a family showing how cystic fibrosis runs in the family. Let's run through briefly what the diagram represents. Now, circles usually represent females, as in curve, circle, so female. So square, male. Okay, and when it's usually shaded, it means the person has the phenotype. In this case, it will be the disease of cystic fibrosis. Let's read through the question. Cystic fibrosis is a lung disorder, and it is caused by a recessive allele. So it means that you need 2 of the allele for the trait to be expressed. Okay, so the genotype most likely will have 2 recessive allele. This question says, Mary has cystic fibrosis. So let's identify where Mary is. Okay, Mary marries John, and they have a daughter, Kelly, with no cystic fibrosis. But marries Brian with cystic fibrosis. This shows part of their family tree. Okay, let's see what the first question asks. First question is asking why Mary has cystic fibrosis, even though neither her parents has the disorder. So go back to the genetic diagram. Okay, you realize that Jess and David, they both don't have the disease, but Mary happens to have the disease. Now let's use some alphabets to help us visualize this. Now, in a full essay question, you need to let something, for example, let the capital A be the dominant allele that codes for the cystic fibrosis disease. Okay, while let small a represents the recessive allele that codes for the gene responsible for cystic fibrosis. So in this case, let's look at all possible genotypes. You have homozygous dominant, heterozygous, and homozygous recessive. Who will have this disease? Remember in the question, they said that cystic fibrosis is a recessive disease. So you need a homozygous recessive individual before this trait is expressed. So only this will have cystic fibrosis. Let's see, in what scenario will Mary be possible? So let's have some alphabets and try. So if it's a scenario where both parents was big A, you can never get a child with cystic fibrosis. You will never get a child. Let's try heterozygous and homozygous dominant. Nope. So the only possible way would be both of them are heterozygous. Okay, let's do the working just for you. Big A, small a, small a, small b, small a. Okay, said it wrongly. In fact, it has a 1/4 chance. Correct? So that's how Mary came about. Okay, so this is why there's some keywords here that you must have. So both her parents must have been heterozygous. So when you do your working in your mind, you know that this was your working, correct? Okay. Which means they each have a recessive allele. Each has a recessive allele. Each parent passed each of the recessive allele to Mary, resulting Mary being homozygous recessive, and therefore she has cystic fibrosis. Alright, let's take a look at part 2. Okay, part 2. Part 2, they're asking why Kelly does not have cystic fibrosis even though her mother has the disorder. So, John married Mary, so both of them had Kelly. So, let's think of possible genotypes of John. It can be either big A, or big A, small a. We won't know. Mary definitely small a, small a. So, there are possible scenarios whereby Kelly is either a... No, cannot. Kelly can never be a big A. Because you have to take an allele from each parent. Correct? So the only possible way genotype would be big A, or big A, small a. Okay, which is why in this answer we talk about how she will receive a dominant allele from the father even if she gets a recessive allele from the mom. She will be heterozygous and the disorder is not expressed. Notice the phrasing. Okay, part C. Part C asks Kelly and Brian having a child. So, let's take a look. Kelly and Brian. Now, since we know that Kelly most likely is a big A, small a. Brian, big A. Come, let's do the working for this. Okay, big A. And you have 2 out of 4, which is half or 50% of their child having cystic fibrosis. And there we have the answer to this question. Okay, question 4. Question 4 shows an experiment to investigate osmosis. 2 potato cylinders, A and B, originally identical in mass balance, using a wooden rule. Cylinders were placed in the liquid, then removed. Okay, so A was placed in concentrated sugar, B was placed in distilled water. Now let's think concentrated sugar in terms of water potential. Most likely, higher water potential in the cell sap of the potato, and then water moves outwards. The net movement of water is outwards, as compared to B, higher water potential in the distilled water than that of the cell sap of the potato cells. Therefore, there's a net movement of water molecules into the potato cylinder, okay, which will cause the overall increase in mass. Which explains why after 30 minutes, this becomes heavier, and actually it looks bigger. And then this most likely lost some mass. Which brings us to the question. So mass of potato cylinder A decreased. Explain why this occurred. Now notice the answers. We always refer to the water potential where? In the cell sap of the potato cells versus the solution. Higher than that of, so that you don't repeat this phrase again. Because it's always from a region of high water potential to a region of lower water potential. Okay, as a result, there's a net movement of water molecules. I'm just going to add that. Net movement of water molecules. Okay, I'm just going to type it out, it's faster. There'll be a net movement of water molecules from, in this case, from the cell sap of the potato cells out into the solution through the partially permeable membrane. Okay, and there we go. Yep, so overall causing the mass to decrease. So there are three parts. You realize the first part of the question answers the definition of osmosis, and there must be an explanation of water potential. Where's higher, where's lower? So there's a comparison of water potential between the cell sap and the solution. Next, we talk about osmosis happening and the movement direction. Notice I used the word net movement of the water molecules. And we need to talk about the partially permeable membrane. Last but not least, you need to talk about how 1, 2, 3 leads to the overall decrease in mass. Okay, so these are the 4 things you need to have in your answer. Okay, similar question, the other way around. Now, this one you must be careful. If the question didn't tell you that B increased, they just asked for a change. You need to tell me, is it positive or negative change? Is it increase or decrease? In this case, the question already told you that it's an increase. Okay, so same thing, compare the water potential. Okay, talk about the net movement of water molecules from where to where, inside, outside. So this one is moved into the potato cells through the partially permeable membrane, causing the mass to increase. That's all for this question. Last but not least, you giveaway question, 3 marks of the definition of osmosis. So again, we are looking at the keyword net movement of what? Water molecules. From where to where? Region of higher to lower water potential through a partially permeable membrane. Okay, notice that if it's any other osmosis question, you need to include the word osmosis also and embed all these components into your answer. Okay, question 5. Most likely a question asking about photosynthesis and respiration. So, figure shows an experiment carried out using water snails and plants. So, I've used different colors. You have set up A, B, C, and D. A, B, C, D. A only has a snail. B only has a plant. C and D. C has both the snail and plant, while D has only the plant, but both of them are in the dark. Okay, so let's take a look. The question wants us to find out, or the aim of the experiment is to find out the concentration of the dissolved carbon dioxide. Now, there are a few ways to do this. You can measure this, use a pH probe, or you can use something called the bicarbonate indicator, which is what we're going to use soon if we have the chance for experiment. Okay, so first question, obviously the one with the snail in it. Tube A increases in terms of its concentration of carbon dioxide. why or what's the name of the process? It's just respiration, talking about what releases carbon dioxide. Okay, glucose, the respiratory substrate. Now let's assume it's aerobic respiration. So in the presence of oxygen, gives out carbon dioxide, water, and lots of energy. That's for the first part. Second part, asking why carbon dioxide concentration in B decreases. Now, obviously, we're looking at plant using carbon dioxide. Answer is photosynthesis. Question asked for a word equation. Please take note that water is on both sides. So carbon dioxide and water are your raw materials for photosynthesis. In the presence of sunlight, and you need chlorophyll to produce your glucose, oxygen, and water. C, part 1. Suggest what happens to the carbon dioxide concentration in C. So you're given the diagram here. So most likely, overall, in the absence of sunlight, take note, so both will undergo respiration. So the snail and the plant both take in oxygen and produces carbon dioxide, so both increase. Explain. So we're looking at both. Okay, if you can talk about respiration, you can talk about oxygen decreasing and carbon dioxide increasing. Name the two processes. Okay, not just that, tell me that's absence of photosynthesis. So there's respiration, but no photosynthesis. There's the two parts of your answer. Okay, D, part 1. What happens in tube D? So you only have the plant here. Plant respires to produce carbon dioxide in the absence, so this is just a one part answer. No photosynthesis takes place. And there we have it, the answer for section A of year 2007. Remember to review your answer and memorize some key phrases. Feel free to clarify if any questions.